Thank you, Jan Tobias. So this is not a case of identity theft that you're witnessing. It's just for organizational purposes that we switched accounts. Let me introduce, welcome everyone to this new seminar. Let me start by introducing today's speakers. We have Stefan Schiffner, who is currently lecturing computer networks at the University of Münster. His research interests focus on secure information technologies and their policy implications. This includes privacy-enhancing technologies, by-design paradigms, and maturity and market readiness of technologies. Then the other speaker is a more familiar face and also a regular participant of our series. It's Professor Bettina Berendt. She's a professor for Internet and Society at the Technical University of Berlin, director of the Weizenbaum Institute, and guest professor at our university, KU Leuven. Her interest in whistleblowing owes much to many years of great collaboration with colleagues from COSIC, Distrinet, and CIF. So we are very happy to welcome you today. Our both speakers will give a talk on computational limits and opportunities of anonymity for whistleblower protection. Earlier, we had another CIF seminar on whistleblowing, but the focus of today will be completely different, as you will find out in a few minutes. Please be aware that we will record this session, but not the discussion afterwards, so then everyone is more free to talk. And then a last thing before I hand over the floor to our both speakers. We are still negotiating the topics for the next talk, but there is the LILAC conference organized by CITIP at the end of this month on AI and data. So I will post the link in the chat to make some publicity. And I now hand over the floor to Professor Berendt.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Thank you, Jan Tobias. And of course, one of the familiar faces from KU Leuven is my co-presenter, Stefan Schiffner. And in fact, we met at KU Leuven when he was working in COSIC. So the world is small and big and large at the same time. Sorry, I'm using the wrong buttons here. Right, and so you've probably been in that seminar or heard other sources recently on whistleblowing. So just to repeat, where is whistleblowing happening? Everywhere where people have the impression something bad is going on that should be known but to a wider audience, and that is being kept secret. There is the potential for whistleblowing. It happens in the public sector, it happens in the private sector with many different motivations and facets, and also the private sector and public sector can be said to be different in the primary focus when the preservation of power or monetary advantages seem to be in the foreground of why some people are not so happy about whistleblowing. But of course, the boundaries are very shifty, and power happens in business and money happens in government. And I really recommend the wonderful book by the speaker from a month ago, which, as Sophie already said, has a very different focus. Namely, we will be looking very much at the question, what can we as computer scientists contribute to this? So why is it important? Here's just one example from the recent past, the Wirecard scandal that raised fresh questions about corporate governance. That was a huge catastrophe for business and for people who lost a lot of money with that. And the interesting bit here is, after the fact, you always know more. So there were people who knew the books. There were people who knew what was going on. Why did they not speak up? And so the idea is how can we incentivize as a society whistleblowing in order for people to have more courage to speak up and reveal wrongdoings before they've caused too much damage. And why don't people speak up? Well, because they're scared. So there is a very real risk of retaliation because you're going to ruffle feathers at the very least. And so whatever you look into the literature, you see the risk of retaliation is really a major disincentive for potential whistleblower. Whenever you see real life cases, you see what happens to many whistleblowers. Well, they go to prison, they lose their job, they lose their lives, you know, their livelihoods, etc. And so this is really something that needs to be addressed if whistleblowing is to be encouraged, which many people argue it is to be encouraged because it really exposes wrongdoing and is good in principle also for companies and governments themselves, not in every single case, but in very many cases. So if you want to disincentivize a behavior, you want to reduce the risk by this behavior, you have a number of options. You could make this behavior, retaliation in this case, illegal, or at least protect whistleblowers legally. So it would be a legal approach. That is what's happening in the EU with the Whistleblowing Directive that is supposed to have been transposed into national law already. It's happened so far in 3 countries, and all the other countries are still in the process or outright stalling. So it's a very slow process to make this generally acceptable. We can make a behavior otherwise shunned, forbidden, or even unattractive. So there's a lot of mentioning in ethics codes. There are organizational cultures, error cultures, as they are called, that could de-incentivize, that could make whistleblowing maybe even not necessary. And of course, that's a somewhat vague area of soft law that is very hard to enforce, even harder than hard law probably. And so the hope for a computer scientist would be that the third option, to make retaliation impossible by allowing whistleblower to report anonymously, would be the safest option. And so being from COSIC and Distrinet and DTIE, we have some affinity to anonymous reporting and anonymity in general, and we will focus on this in the rest of the talk. Okay, so we need communications diagrams. They usually start out very simply. There is a whistleblower who sees some misdeed and tells that to an audience via a message. And this audience could be colleagues, it could be management, it could be the general public. There are lots of variations here. So far, so good. But there's one big problem here. There is usually someone, doesn't need to be the one evil person, it can be a set of people, it can be a lot of entrenched structures, but we're making it simple here. Somebody who's, or something that's responsible for the act, and importantly also somebody who bears the consequences for this act, who's held accountable. And this person or set of persons is also by necessity mostly in the audience. So there is this backward link of retaliation, or the possibility to retaliate against the whistleblower. Now, the promise of of anonymity then is that the whistleblower would disappear in some sufficiently large anonymity set so that all we know is that somebody from this anonymity set saw the act, that somebody from the anonymity set told about it, and so the wrongdoer also only has the chance to retaliate against some anonymity set. And if that's, for example, everybody in your company, do you really want to fire all of them? So the idea is that by this anonymization, we weaken the threat of retaliation. And that sounds very nice and easy as a setup, but when we go into the details and the nitty-gritty of how this is actually being transformed into real life, we see quite a number of threats to anonymity. For example, many people don't know the difference between confidentiality and anonymity. They say, if there is this trusted ombudsperson or whatever in the company, your data will be kept confidential. Nobody will know who you are. But of course, anonymity is the idea that nobody has this information about your identity. And so confidentiality is something quite categorically different. And we want to get rid of this necessity of trust towards some knower to whom we have reported. Then let's say we have some slightly more simple-minded, but still somewhat more advanced, technologically supported sets, such as a website where you can post your report. There's a lot of cues that could lead to your direct re-identification, legal names, pseudonyms, fingerprints, if it's physical evidence. If there is some high fidelity anonymous reporting channel, and you choose something obvious as your password for the case management data, that also probably not such a great idea, etc. There are addresses of various types, physical location of people, email addresses, telephone numbers, IP addresses, GPS coordinates, you name it. And all of that sounds a little bit naive, but it tends to happen that people do not take sufficient precautions and are also not being warned by somewhat naively implemented reporting systems. There is a set of other measures, such as tracking or logging, or even to begin with, the idea that only people who need to know something would have access to some documents. All of these are wonderful measures. They are useful for security. That's why they're being implemented usually, not to spy on your employees and keep them from whistleblowing. But of course, if only a few people know, if you track them, if you log everything, it becomes a lot easier to de-anonymize whistleblowers. If you have report metadata, you can make further inferences from the time when a report was made, the voice, if you have some voice communication, the linguistic style, the lingo that's being used so that somebody reveals their expert knowledge, etc., etc. And last but not least, we face a very big problem. What if only you could have known that? What if only you were present in a situation that revealed wrongdoing, and so by telling, it's clear that you were there, the wrongdoer was there, and nobody else, or you were there, a very small number of other people were there, and that makes the anonymity set a lot smaller than you'd like it to be. And so in some sense, this is really, really difficult to deal with, and the message content itself may imply your identity. Okay, now I've really discouraged you you think nothing is working. This is just really a slide for warning, because if you're not careful implementing a secure channel or a whistleblowing reporting support system, these things can happen. But now we go to the space where things do work. We look at what can we actually provide, and then we drill down into that to see what we can promise and what we cannot promise, and then we return back to the bigger picture to say what follows from that. How can we support anonymity? Okay, so that is where I hand over to Stefan.
Yeah. I got also the control these slides. It's nice. For having me to say. Yeah, Bettina, the last slide was really nice to see all the and it's as Bettina said, it's really a whole bunch of it, and all of them will be here. But we both are more engineers than social scientists. We said we are at the things which are engineered are solvable. We look at the problem in smaller partial problems and search for solutions. Our first idea, of course, is okay, anonymity is hiding in classes, so you want to be in big swarm words on the right side and not the person. And as Bettina said before, there is a lot of reason why anonymity set is small. And the question is now, can we technically do something to a bigger mass of people around us? And then the obvious idea for researchers in privacy and technologies, hiding in a, oh, we use. And of course, this is not an idea of the two of us. This has been implemented in at least two quite new cases. Is one secure drop, as originally was named Drop and developed by Aaron Swartz and Kevin Pullen in 2013. They implemented a whistleblowing system based on Tor services, and the target was whistleblowing for journalists and sources. The cool thing this is, it's out there, it's used in New York Times, it's used Intercept, you might know, and we'll talk about Intercept case for an analyze. For German-speaking Deutsche, for the Belgians, Pasche might be known as a news platform. They all use instances of drop. The other thing that's been also implemented and quite promoted by Tor is clones. The target is slightly different. It's more a blowing platform for public services.
Stefan, sorry to interrupt you, but yeah. Some people are experiencing some problems with the sound.
People, you as well.
Yeah, me as well. But it was not the case when we were talking before the seminar. But now apparently something happened.
What?
Bettina suggests. Oh, sorry. Bettina suggests that you try to reconnect. Sometimes it helps, apparently.
For this, I tried. Hello, am I back?
You sound
much better.
I think there is one thing we need to warn people. I think this was my Skype, which disturbed in between. I ended and then the permissions are wrong. And anyway, sorry for this. Now, I was in Global Leaks somehow. I still have my slides and I'm good now. Okay. Okay, then back to Global Leaks. As I said, very similar to Secure Drop, even in the implementation, in the choices for the architecture, little bit a different user base and target audience. Here we're talking about whistleblowing for public services, so it's also more the customers of, for example, AWP, which is, by the way, a Belgium-based company or association, and they have Global Leaks as a service as cloud service, and they provide it to Iceland, to Spain, to Ecuador, for example, Peru. So you see, but again, the architecture is kind of similar. So that's why for our example here and what we can do, and this is the next part of the talk, let's talk about the a very small side remark with the switch of the system I forgot. Interesting is the motivation of some of the developers. For example, it needs to be mentioned here that Aaron Schwartz was actually prosecuted for his activities in whistleblowing, and in the end, because of the way how he was treated, he actually saw the need of taking his own life. So this is a risky business, and even people who know how to protect themselves might be so much exposed in their private life that, as Bettina said in the introduction, private or consequences for their private life are so severe that they don't see what to do. That's why we actually talk about how to protect people, right? Okay, then, and let's look into how Secure Drop is architecturally built, right? How does it do? So Secure Drop, back to Bettina's communication level, we have a whistleblower and we have an audience. And the whistleblower, of course, will use modern communication. So he has a internet connected PC, and on this internet connected PC, he has already installed a Tor browser. Then using this Tor browser, the whistleblower will somehow learn about a news outlet which is using Secure Drop, and will connect with the Secure Drop hidden service, and for this then the message of the whistleblower is put into a Tor and is routed through the network, so that actually the whistleblower already anonymously connects with the Secure Drop server. And the message magically, so to say, arrives without knowing who was the sender, at least not knowing from the metadata. And this message then is taken by the Secure Drop server, and the Secure Drop server will use a public key of a encryption scheme, will encrypt this message, and then will again use and will again pack this into an onion so that it can be delivered through the service, through the hidden service, through Tor from the hidden service to the journalist's internet connected PC, right? Here, the journalist cannot do much with this because the message is still encrypted. And the private key of this public secret key pair here is actually only on a secure viewing station. And for this secure viewing station, the assumption in Secure Drop is that it's offline, that there's an air gap, and that the journalist copies the actual message, encrypted message on floppy or a USB stick, carries it to the secure viewing device, and now can use there the secret key to decrypt and see the message. And actually the assumption is, of course, now that the journalist takes care of what Bettina mentioned in her slide before, to remove all unnecessary but potentially identifying information. So maybe the whistleblower was a little bit careless and added some information about themselves so that they would be identifying. So we actually now trust the journalist to remove this information as unnecessary and then publish it to the audience. So by now, hopefully, the anonymity set is as big as the anonymity set served by Tor, right? Well, let's first, for the next analysis, first look at note. Why is my slide not changing? Hello? Sorry for this. Slow response from the computer. So let's first look at who sets what up, because this kind of gets important for understanding what Secure-Drop can serve and what Secure-Drop cannot serve. Well, obviously, the machine of the whistleblower is under the control of the whistleblower. This is just his machine, and then if you look at web pages or news outlets which are offering Secure-Drop, they will explain to potential whistleblowers how to deal with their machine, how to set it up, how to get to a Tor browser, how to take care not to using, for example, the network of their employer or using their own network, which home network, which is related to themselves, but go to a public place and so on and so on. So it's an explanation what they can do to make their computer and their connection as secure as possible, right? Then, of course, we have Tor as a service we assume for Secure-Drop just existing and working, and you may know or may not know how it works, but it's not important. We assume it provides anonymity. And then for the rest, actually the news outlet needs to set this up. The news outlet will actually run the hidden service. And actually there's also, with the explanation how to set up Secure-Drop, there's also information coming that you need to take care on the server, that the server actually gets a monitor server next to it so that you can actually ensure that this server is protected. And the other thing, of course, the news outlet will take care, or hopefully takes care of, the journalist's internet connected PC, right? Usually you have an IT department who will actually make sure that everyone can work. And then the other part is they also have to set up the secure viewing station. Very important here, even this is one big green box. The assumption is, of course, that, for example, the people who are actually administrating this Secure-Drop server and the monitor are not the same people as the journalists, for example. Right? Also, there is a advice to separate these people so that information is harder to piece together, right? So now, so far, the administrative jobs. Slide changes are hard with this today. Well, let's talk about what Secure-Drop wants to protect, right? Well, obviously, Secure-Drop wants to protect the sender anonymity. And sender anonymity, their own claim is that they want to protect anonymity, so to say, to everyone, to the NSA, to the network provider. And given how careful they described in the setup, who should be administrator of what, even to a certain extent, the the journalist should be not aware too much about the identity of the whistleblower. Further, of course, it tries to provide confidentiality from as a communication channel, a confidential communication channel between the whistleblower and the journalist. So this is necessary for this question. The journalist can care to remove from the evidence as much needed to protect the whistleblower, but still probably want to submit as a whistleblower information to the journalist, which you wholly trust to a certain extent, because the journalist needs to verify your sources. It's not enough to only submit the fact, but the journalist needs to be convinced that this information is correct. Right? And then, of course, so we need a credential communication channel. For the threat model, of course, we inherit in principle the attacker model of so anything which can be of retour can be observed, and then it gets interesting. Actually, we also assume to a certain extent that the journalist's internet connected P is kind of publicly accessible. It's different to the internet connected PC of the whistleblower, and this is sort of this because well, investigative journalists are usually quite known, so we assume they are much more under observation than a potential whistleblower, which probably never before was visible. So this is the difference between the PCs, and that's here. So, and well. Here we are again then to the what the attacker cannot, and then obviously we assume the viewing station not visible, and we assume the secret server operates as a hidden server and secure. Right?
I'm sorry, Stefan, to interrupt you a second time, but I think the audio troubles came back.
No. Stefan. Is the next slide the reality winner slide? I could take over and while you reconnect.
Yep. The next slide is, I think, or we can go to the slide.
Yeah, let's do that, and you reconnect, okay? And I just, yeah, okay, great. See you in a sec. Sorry. To make this a bit more concrete, we looked at one fairly well-known case, but we hope not everybody has read this already in much detail. But in a sense, this case study of an NSA whistleblower or a US Army whistleblower illustrates these problems and these threats. So Reality Winner was a US Air Force trained cryptolinguist, and she was struggling with what she witnessed in that particular job, realizing her translation helped to kill people, and left for inner conflict. Went on to work in another company, and well, again, they did work for the US Army. And in that context, stumbled upon documents that implicated Russian hacking attacks targeting the then ongoing presidential election. And she couldn't believe what was going on, and she thought the American people need to know that. And realizing that nobody would do anything by themselves, like especially not the government, she decided to leak these documents to the Intercept, or in fact, it was one document. And the Intercept did what good journalists do. They asked the other side for verification and shared the document with the NSA. The NSA, of course, didn't like that very much and started an investigation. And now we come to this need to know principle. Only 6 people had access to these documents. And then we narrow it down further by tracking and logging. Only winner contacted the intercept from her work computer. That's not yet proof that she leaked. But then they were able to look at the documents themselves that had been scanned from the hard copy that she had actually smuggled out of the building. And these scans contained ID dots of the printer. So that narrowed down the anonymity set from a large set of employees to 6 and then to 1. And for that, she was charged with removing classified information from a government facility, got served a 63-month sentence, and was released under probation in mid-2021. Still under heavy constraints about what she can say to whom. Basically, she can't say anything about the case. There's a very worthwhile chapter in Kelly et al.'s book on this case, written by her mother. So the question is, what would have been the potential gain for her from this architecture? And as we said, we focus on secure drop here. And of course, the intercept, we should think the intercept knows what they're doing. And of course, they're using some kind of, or they have been using secure drop for a long time. So the elements were there, let's say. So secure drop could have hidden or would have hidden that winner contacted the intercept. Of course, the initial anonymity set of 6 is pretty small. Timing could have been another clue. And the main evidence was this identification code. So that was a major mistake, of course, that the journalist naively copied that document so that this piece of identification was still available. And the question is, so there was human error, but the question, if we go deeper, is the air gap in secure drop even real? And that very much depends on the actual machine for the SVS. Can it write on any other device? Does it store any plain text? How is the plain text otherwise treated? And who provides this machine? So there's a lot of other things to be kept in mind in really assessing whether information can flow back, which would be another channel for re-identification. So, and now let's assume, let's even assume all this worked. So what is the journalist's burden, even if that technology is magically provided? So her anonymity set was reduced by the fine-grained evidence delivered by the intercept to the NSA. And the problem is that the journalist would need to know what the NSA knows to assess what can be shared. So in a sense, they would need to know, there's probably been some tracking, there's probably been need to know principles, so that the initial anonymity set of who could even have seen this document in the first place is small. I guess a journalist would expect that. They would need to know people are being logged and tracked. So be aware of where the communication, the initial communication by email had come from. And in principle, journalists should be aware also of printer dots. So then if you know all these things, then you can take steps to change the evidence that you connect back for verification to the NSA by sufficiently blurring photographs, for example, or copying in some other way. And of course, the more you think that this could also be an evidence or this could also be a clue to re-identification, at some point there might be no utility left. And that's really a big problem. So in general, really, this is kind of key. You need to know what the others know. Oops, sorry, I clicked too often. And that's already pretty big of a requirement for the journalistic case. But when we go back to the setting that we have company internal reporting channels, there is yet another stumbling block that gets introduced. Namely, you're making a big trust assumption. The journalist would be thought to be a neutral instance, you should be able to trust them in this respect. But if your company sets up the reporting channel, or if the company outsources this task to some whistleblowing support technology provider, where's the neutrality? How can you make sure that you can actually trust these people to have provided the technology that they say they have provided? And of course, in this moment, when we talk about knowing what others know and trusting, we already make this step outside the purely technological possibilities and ask for design from organizational culture, from laws regulating that, how we can make sure that these conditions are also met. And there's one thing we see as a potential, and I'm sorry, I see Stefan being back.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Well,
so
my camera is gone.
Yeah, exactly. So is it okay if I just finish it here and then you
Sure.
come back with the camera and then we have the discussion? Okay, super.
No, I don't get the camera going. This is the thing.
Okay, well, but we've seen you before, so we imagine you. Right, and there's, in a sense, one ray of hope that we see in this whole setup thing is that if we have the situation that there is an internal organizational thing that we have a wrongdoer who may be one person or several persons being internal to the organization, so being internal or somehow linked to management, and management in any way being responsible, they are not only responsible for offering a channel for whistleblowing, for potentially offering an anonymous channel for whistleblowing, but also for setting the whole context of technical and organizational measures that can influence these anonymity possibilities. To be concrete, Stefan and I had a big discussion about these security measures. Like, well, you know, if you track everything, if you log everything, then it becomes very clear that the anonymity set of people who can know something, who can be the ones who have access to the document, who have been in a certain room at a certain time, that this anonymity set gets very small or even gets narrowed down to one in many cases. So would it be an idea to relax these rules, these security measures on purpose, you know, to make the anonymity sets of people who have access to something, people who may have been in that room at some point, to coarsen these sets, to really provide anonymity sets by the design of your whole building and organization rules and so on, in order to support not only the privacy of people in these contexts, but also support larger anonymity sets for potential whistleblowers. And of course, we have this massive conflict of interest there. But we wanted to put this up for discussion. What follows from this, that's in a sense the summing up of this. We would have a fictitious example of management choices that trade off a security loss against a whistleblower incentivization gain. Let's say we do some k-anonymous access control, k-anonymous logging. How could this be argued? How would this be argued? How would this be done in different domains, such as top secret documents or accounting data, the case of Winner or the case of Wirecard? And lastly, I think we've seen that we've come full circle from looking at a purely technological question. Hey, can we support anonymous whistleblowing because that might protect whistleblowers against retaliation because we don't even know anymore who they are? We've seen that this doesn't function in the perfect way that we wanted to do, and it often gets bungled up by various things, and there are principled reasons that limit anonymity like that. But how do we combine the technological promises with organizational measures? How do we combine it with legal guarantees? How should we position ourselves with regard to the possibility that the whistleblowing directive in the EU makes for anonymous reporting, which is actually something that many governments in the EU have huge problems with? How would we argue the case, and what kind of technical and organizational measures would we require to be written into the law or other regulations to really protect whistleblowers in the future? And with that, I'd like to conclude. And I think, that was the conclusion slide as well. And it would be great to go into the discussion with you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina and Stefan, for this enlightening presentation and also the very nice visuals. Now you can see me.